Woof woof, I'm a werewolf. Welcome to the mini playthrough of the Rabies Druid. So how do you spread COVID-19 as a druid? Well, to start off, you pick up a bat and beat things to death, an act arguably still more humane than being forced into lockdown. Anywho, by the time I reached Cold Plains, I was at level 2, which meant that I could get my first point into the skill in Poison Vine. This is the earliest skill with which you can start infecting your surrounding, and it is honestly great. One thing I can never figure out is why this vine has a health bar, because he takes like no damage, stays with you forever, follows you everywhere, and does pretty good damage to help you in the early game. It is the perfect summon. Well, not exactly perfect. The one thing with the vine is that it does take its time to go to places. Sure, you can recast it near a bunch of enemies that you really wanted to kill, but it has a mind of its own, so you may end up killing Corpse Fire the humane way after all, while it is taking care of his cronies. That honestly isn't that bad because it highlights one of the strengths, AoE. Who the hell doesn't like that? Well, single targets. This fight with Griswold is the perfect example of what I'm trying to say here. High health single target monsters are not exactly the wine's bread and butter. It is because of reasons like this why eventually I would be needing things like this ring with 40 attack rating. Yep, you heard it here boys, we'll be going melee eventually. You are allowed to get appropriately excited. For now though, Wine is pretty great for the Countess runs. For the runes from her, I went with Stealth for the obligatoriness, and the stats are nice too, I guess. Really though, I kinda regret not getting a Malice here. Not for me. Oh no, I can't attack for shit. For my merc, I meant. That is because, as can be made very clear in this Andy fight, the Vine is not fit to fight bosses. I mean, yeah. This one is a bit lopsided because it is Andy, the lopsided queen of poison, but it is more than that. It is about how the vine only sometimes attacks her, sometimes just wanders off looking for her little fallens. Thus killing her with this thing takes a while. Yeah, no thanks Voreve, don't need the Andy bug from you this time. Don't think I'll be running her on this guy. Or maybe it was me all along. There could be an argument that the vine can be played better, as I figured out in the Maggot Lair and the Snake Temple by just spamming the shit out of it. Yeah, that does surprisingly work better. On the Stairs of the Arcane though, yeah, it's trying its level best guys. That's the best I can say here, I guess. With Duriel I tried my new strat and it worked a little better. Again, hard to tell since Andy and Duriel are very different kids, you know? Like one has friends around them, the other is a loner single child that loves to eat all that attention up. But enough about me and my issues. With the Merc and this more active summoner lifestyle, the Duriel kill was actually pretty good. 8 out of 10, and so are these gloves. Sweet. Now I realize that I haven't really been talking about my skill build that much. That is honestly because it has literally been put everything into Poison Vine. What can I say, being toxic just isn't that hard for some people. However, at level 20 I ran out of points to put into it, and thus it was time to become a good boy and get points into Werewolf and Feral Rage. The latter is pretty great right now for some incidental faster run walk, but mostly I'm going to be using these as prereqs to get points into Rabies. That I was mainly doing to get more damage for Vine as a synergy, but Rabies itself actually gives me a way to defend myself against monsters. Now I can bite them. Major fending off and annoying younger sibling vibes, by the way. Now Act 3 as a whole is pretty boring, but mine turned out pretty alright since first I ended up finding Nokuzin at Serena's temple. Next up was the Mephisto fight, and yeah, if it looks like Mephisto's health bar is just not moving, well, you are in trouble. That is because although he is frail and will eventually succumb to your attacks, the other two that are waiting in normal are going to give you some major bad times. Anywho, other than the anxiety of what is to come, Mephi also gave me this unique scale mail, Hawk Mail. This is pretty great actually, especially considering that I'll be going melee later, but then you realize that I'm playing a version of Diablo with overpowered rune words, like really overpowered ones. That's the price we pay for quality of life, people. For right now, I was gonna stick with the summoner build, but this fight with Ijwal gave me reason for doubt. This build really is just topsy-turvy all over the place. I mean, here I am with a rollover guy like Izzy, and it takes me forever to kill this dude, but then when I enter Chaos, something like the Infector pack was no big deal at all. Decisive was actually what took the longest. Actually no, that would be Diablo. Yeah, I will spare you the 8 minutes that it took for this guy to kill the big red lizard, but this end shot where you can see all the dead vine corpses probably paints the picture. Technique-wise, there was not much to it, just dodge his attacks and summon the vine every so often. Fitting that the reward was pretty meh as well. The topsy-turvy continues with things like Shank taking forever to kill. Yeah, you heard me right, this guy. And then the Moon Lords in the ice caves falling down like bitches. Then came the Ancients. Madoc is by far the most dangerous here. That is why I targeted him first. You can pretty clearly see why as well. His sniping skills were on point and multiple times he got me down to pretty low HP. Thankfully he himself has pretty low HP as well, and thus he went down first. Next, I did try to go all macho and biting the shit out of the rest too, and it worked quite a treat. Rabies at this stage does more damage than the wine. Sure, it is more mana and more dangerous since I have to get into monsters' faces, not to mention the AR, but it did help me finish this fight marginally quicker. It wasn't a fast kill by any stretch of the imagination, nor was it a pretty one, but the reward at the end was pretty. Fitting that I didn't hit the record button for this one then. Well, this definitely changes things since, you know, I kind of found the perfect weapon. I was planning on running Nightmare Andy for this, but now that I already have it, I think I can focus a lot more on Nightmare Countess. The problem still is going to be AR, and thus I decided to get a fix for that: normal Andy runs. Yeah, these actually were not that bad at all, since I have a lot more MF and damage than I did when I fought Andy first. Clearing her is a lot easier, and within like 10 runs I had both Hisaru's boots and belt, which were the two things that I was trying to find to get that AR bonus from the 2-set bonus. Now Act 1 in Nightmare was pretty eye-opening in showing me how much bulk the Druid does not have in his current form. You see, not only am I attacking monsters at close range, but I have invested all of my skill points into my attacking skills, and thus my bulk suffers from not having any support from points into Werewolf or Lycanthropy. The upside of that is that Rabies damage really starts to pick up. By the time I was at the Countess Tower, I was doing like 3k damage to these chicks. I was also dying to these chicks, especially the ones holding bows, but 3k damage, dude. That's pretty sweet. All this while trying to get some runes for decent gear and trying to get a high enough level to use my a little too perfect to believe weapon. When all was said and done, this is the gear that I decided to start Nightmare with. The Flesh Render with its middling 157 ED roll in my weapon slot. I actually quite value the skills on this thing, and to show you how much, my headgear is actually lore. Yeah, not one of the new OP ones. As it turns out, with this guy, you do get a lot more damage with plus skills, so as long as I can, I actually would like to maximize it. I get my CBF from my armor anyways, Hawkmail. For my res, I turn to the old and trusty Ancient's Pledge, and Nokozins as my amulet definitely helps out as well. For the AR bonus, I'm rocking the 2-piece Hisaru's. You know, I just realized that you can upgrade sets now. This makes this even better since you do get some pretty decent res on both items, and then you have the great AR bonus as a 2-piece set bonus on the boots. That straight AR bonus does come up huge, and thus I have my rings helping me out a little bit in that regard as well. Both with a little bit of AR, Dex, Lifesteal, and MF, cause why not? Gloves also have MF, but the reason I'm wearing these is the light res. Overall, with all my concerted efforts, the res don't look too bad. Damage doesn't look that bad either. Now for skills, I still have maxed Poison Vine. That's because I never ended up respeccing. This just ends up acting as a great sidekick, and it boosts my Rabies damage as well. Speaking of, in the shapeshifting tree I have maxed Rabies, as one might expect from a Rabies Druid. I have only one hard point into Feral Rage, and I really just like using it as a single hit charge up before I go in with the Rabies. Going forwards, I'm actually going to be putting points alternatively in the following: Lycanthropy for more health, and Fury because it is a lot cheaper than anger management classes. Also because physical damage is going to help a lot against poison resistant monsters. Huh? What was that? Did somebody call Andariel? Well, she's here anyways, and she's pretty takedownable. That is thanks to the physical damage that I get from Fury and my sick weapon. Another thing that my sick weapon grants my arsenal is Crushing Blow, and that really hacks down on the monster's health and makes taking down bosses a lot easier. That being said, don't think that I'm just a Fury Druid now. Rabies still plays a crucial part in my offense as it helps to clean up Andy much faster when she gets down to low health. I was pretty happy with this fight, and thus I decided to run her from level 40 to 45, just hoping that her drops would be better than, you know, this one. Thankfully, they were. I got a pretty interesting collection of weapons like this one and this one. I also got this cool amulet. Now, that is something you don't see every day. However, I'm pretty happy with my Wolf Club and Fire Amulet, so I will just put these in the stash for now. My attacking sequence with this guy in this current state of this build is as follows. First go in with Feral Rage to get the attack rating, faster run walk and lifesteal bonus. Then follow up with a Rabies bite to let the poison flow and finish up with Fury in the meantime. That works great on mob packs and to an extent on single targets as well. The Duriel fight is a pretty extreme version of that with his holy freeze and such, making life tougher for a melee wolf like meself, but having the aspect of summons in the form of the vine was proving to be useful still, as it did distract Duriel in the middle, for however short of a duration it may be. Still, enough to land those crushing blows and grueling poisons to finish the fight. Now my line of attack worked great. And then I faced Act 3 and started getting my butt kicked. This act does do this to you, but as a blessing in disguise, it also showed me the benefit of stacking Feral Rage beyond the one hit. The lifesteal bonus from the additional hits that you can stack in the middle of the attack chain are pretty incredible, and at this stage of the game, where monster damage is starting to take a steep upturn, the extra bit of recovery that you get goes a long way. Against single targets, as you can tell, I was fully on the stacking Feral Rage train as I had stacked it all the way against Mephisto. Although stacking it itself is a bit of a pain since the attack rating and the attack speed of Feral Rage is strictly worse than that of Fury, but the lifesteal and attack rating bonus at the end is well worth it. Now Act 4 poses a big problem. Pit Lords. These guys are literally the perfect counter to this guy. The biggest problem here is literally the poison immune mod. It also doesn't help that these guys are physically resistant and thus they literally counter my build perfectly. Now that doesn't mean that the build is bad. Anything not named Pit Lords is basically my bitch. Like, this build actually performs pretty amazingly well against mobs and single targets alike. I'm greatly impressed by its performance. It is just a shame that in Chaos we face a lot of our kryptonite, Pit Lords, especially in the form of Infector. Now my plan with this guy was to get a pretty high Feral Rage stack before the fight to get the 32% lifesteal during the Infector fight. Now I did end up timing that pretty well, only forgot to time the actual Werewolf ability. Yeah, let me give you one guess as to what happened next. Now, because of this, I had to slowly clear my way through Chaos again, which at least got me 39% chances. Hey-oh. The fight next time on was much more in my control, mostly because I timed shit right, but also because this time Infector spawned with the teleportation mod and teleported into this weird corner, allowing me to take on his minions one by one. Again, anything not named Pit Lords was a breeze for this guy. That included Diablo. Now, okay, his damage was more akin to a tornado than a breeze as he kept on catching me at the end of his lightning hose attack, but the damage from Rabies and Fury was just too good. Fitting that the reward followed suit. My favorite set item in the game, ladies and gentlemen, Guillaume's face. We really crushing some monsters now. Well, maybe we crushing them a few levels later, as I do need some points in strength. To get that, I stopped at my usual pit stop of Eldritch to do some leveling runs from level 53 to 55. Then on to saving Anya. Frozenstein gave me a little bit of trouble here since he was mana burn, but like I have been saying, anything not poison immune really is no problem for this guy. Now that doesn't mean that you should just jump into a pack of Moon Lords and not expect to, you know, get fucked. Still, the build works great. Ancients show that. Honestly, at this stage of the game, I believe that my most important skill is actually Feral Rage. That might seem a little weird since I have been mostly gushing about Rabies and Fury being my main source of offense, but the support that Feral Rage provides in the back end is pretty invaluable. Because of this, I had been speccing it in Act 5, and in this fight I had it almost to the point where I had 45% lifesteal at max Feral Rage. Like, we are literally reaching life tap levels of recovery here, and it really shows. I played smart around Talik here in the end since he was fire enchanted, and thus I put a Rabies bite on him and let him die far away from me so I don't get caught in the explosion. Now getting caught up in the waves is an inevitability, and this guy doesn't handle it particularly well. Waves 4 and 5 are the real culprits, with the former being poison immune and thus your offense being pretty much reduced against them, basically having to rely only on physical damage and crushing blows once you drag them far away from Bale's decrep range. Then there's Wave 5, and do I need to say anything about Wave 5 at this point? They were extra fast as well to make life even harder. Thus I pulled the ladder wave and left them hanging there while I went on to take on Bale, a fight which was much easier than the two. People do write off this guy quite often, but he is capable of creating some nuisance with his appendages, but the damage from Rabies and the raw dog from Fury was enough to handle him. Still not enough to convince me that doing Bale runs would be a good idea, and I think you all would agree with me. Plus, I think you all would have disowned me if I didn't do a cow run with building a Rabies Druid. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. The strat that I used here was just to tag one cow and run away while occasionally smacking them with Feral Rage to keep my faster run walk up. So cow runs I did for about 10 levels, and since I had my chances on, killing the Cow King was actually quite profitable as I ended up finding a Bloodletter, which I can give to my Act 5 Merc as a pretty decent weapon, a Lem Rune, which is a great find since it will allow me to build Treachery for this guy, and this thing. This was the main event, the weapon that I think I will use in Hell with great damage, AR, and most importantly, Deadly Strike. Another thing that I did in Hell was to run the Countess. Now the strat here was simple. I lay down a summon inside the Countess room and Rabies the girls as they come to attack it at the entrance. The poison would spread, kill everyone in the room, and I would just waltz in and pick up the runes. This strat was pretty consistent, and the reason I was running her in the first place was to get a pull rune to upgrade my weapon to its elite base. Did I find the pull rune? Did I ever? After a day of farming at least 5 or 6 hours and nearly getting to level 75, I had found a Mal and an Ist, but no pull. In the end, I decided to just go mule one from my shared stash as a hand-down item. Remember when I used to do that? Well, we're bringing it back because F me if I was going to do another Countess run with this guy. Also, I wanted to get this video out in time for you boys, because that's the thing I do now, apparently. So, without further ado, let's get into Hell and the items that I would be using to clear that difficulty with. To start off, we have the weapon, the Pierre Tombal Quant. Literally the first time I've said that name, and probably the last time as well. This is why I love mini playthroughs. I get to use these items that no one else would ever think to use. I mean, why oh why would you pick this weapon over something like a Tomb Reaver? I'll tell you why, because in solo self-found this is the best I can do, and it is a damn good best. Great damage, good AR bonus, and massive deadly strike. This weapon along with my G-Phase gives me 70% chance to do double damage, along with crushing blow, faster hit recovery, and all the other nice things that you get from G-Phase. When you couple that high double damage doing chance with the fact that I do a lot of damage very quickly thanks to the Shale Rune in my weapon and Treachery, it is just one of those symphonies which you sometimes get in this game where all the gear and build come together and add to it. Anyways, the attack speed from Treachery actually gets me to the further IAS useless breakpoint. The Fade and Cold Res are very important for my defenses as well, more on that later. Other pieces that form my defensive core are Nokosin with the 50 Fire Res. I also crafted a Coral Ring to get myself Lightning Res and some incidental lifesteal that I get plenty from Feral Rage. The other ring gives me AR, Dual Res, and some incidental Mana Leech that I get plenty from my weapon. My gloves give me Lightning Res, which is pretty important, and Magic Find, which is less so. The belt and boots you already know since it is the red pair of Hisarus with Cold Res and Life on the belt, and Fire Res and Faster Run Walk and AR on the boots. Even with all that in my defensive core, my defenses are bad. My res is abhorrent and my life is very low at 585. Thus, to fix these things, I have made a few changes to the build which are probably apparent just by looking at the screen, but we'll go over the deets anyways. They mostly come in the summoning tree. I still have the 20 points in Poison Creeper since it is a synergy for Rabies, and 1000 poison damage is actually more than you think. Then I have 5 points in Oak Sage, which helps everyone around, but most importantly it helps out the 5 points that I have in Grizzly. This guy is a proper meat shield, and that's what you need if you want to Fury in health with my defenses. The 5 points bump his HP up and the Oak Sage does more of the same. I've maxed out Rabies since this is a Rabies Druid, and I have 5 in Werewolf, Lycanthropy and Feral Rage because I felt that was a nice sweet spot for all of them. Then I'm dumping the rest into Fury since, as it turns out, this is actually a hybrid build with poison and physical damage, and the physical side hits like a truck with my weapon upgrade. My Merc is an Act 1 rogue and she uses Freezing Arrow to provide me some very helpful CC and also Vigor Aura from her Harmony Bow. I stuck a stealth on her for now since she needed the dex to wield a shadow bow, but I will be switching to a Nephlum in the next available opportunity. Worm Skull rounds her off by giving her some much needed lifesteal. Now one thing I did do with this guy was drink thawings and antidotes before hitting the wilderness to increase my cold and poison res by 50 for 30 seconds a pop. Now the Andariel fight had a lot of damage flowing both ways. Although I drank a lot of antidotes and had Fate procced with Treachery, my poison res was still sitting at 31 and thus her attacks hurt a lot. Healing potions were merely aesthetic and I had to empty up some rejuves. Thankfully not too many though, because although she hit like a truck, I hit back just as hard and got her down. Now with this build, since every skill point is important, it can get a little hectic to ensure that your Oak Sage, Wine, Frenzy, Merc, Werewolf, Feral Rage, and Rabies passive ticking is all up. Mostly dying with this fella is when one of those really important things dies. Generally it starts with the Oak Sage, and generally it ends with the Druid. Snake Temple is a problem with this guy. Firstly, the snakes are cold immune, so your Merc can't do shit. Next, their charge attack insta-kills your Oak Sage, which starts the chain reaction for everyone else on the team to die. The poor bear turns into a ping pong ball. The way that I got out of here was using my wild card of using Rabies damage to do the work while I stalled and finished off with Fury. The Duriel fight reminds us just what an awesome mechanic attack rating really is. Now although I was able to get the poison ticking on him pretty early, getting Feral Rage to stack up was a chore. However, every hit I got, it got more and more rewarding as it made my next hit significantly more likely to get through and get those crushing blows and massive damage off, and maybe attack rating is an awesome mechanic. I know, that was a good one. Anyways. Now one aspect of my build that I would not blame if you did not notice, mainly because I haven't talked about it much, is the fact that I don't have a source of Cannot Be Frozen on this guy. The way that I've been getting around it has really just been with Fade and drinking thawing potions to get my cold res into the 80s, but this drop just changed all that. I always dreamed of finding a Ravenfrost on a melee mini playthrough, and those dreams come true today. This is best in slot shit, ladies and gentlemen. That would certainly help in the Mephisto fight, but I still drank thawings and antidotes since he does do a plethora of elemental damage. Lo and behold, even with my prep, Mephi stood absolutely decimating me with his attacks, tearing my party in half but taking damage as well. It's almost like they did this on purpose. Andy, stressful, Duriel, chill. Mephi, stressful? We'll see about the rest of them as we get to them. One thing that we don't have to see to know that is friggin' amazing is this guy's damage. But just in case you were wondering, here is a little showcase. In the CS, it was really a song of the unsung heroes that roared. First against Infector, his pack of dogs absolutely decimated my team and destroyed me into a retreat as well. What ended up working on him was actually my most underrated summon, Poison Vine. Since it buries into the ground, Infector pack took longer to kill it than they did my bear, and thus I was able to land my Furies on him in the meanwhile. Not only that, the poison damage allowed his healing to not work as well, which is pretty valuable as well. Against Decisive, it was my Mercenary who was the star of the show, with her freezing arrow stopping Decisive's boys in their tracks, allowing me to go in freely and go for the kills. Finally, against Vizier, the underrated damage of Rabies, which has kind of been overshadowed by the dominance of my weapon, and Fury took over, since this guy was indeed physical immune. Also, I am happy to report that Diablo was chill. Well, as chill as a lizard living in literal fiery hell can be. He did take out all my minions with his various attacks, but I had taken a significant chunk of his health by then, and that's all she wrote. Pierre Tumbal, or whatever that thing is? That thing is good. Now, Ancients had the standard over-preparing ritual of me getting everything in order, filling my cube up with potions, proccing Fade and drinking thawings and antidotes to get my res up, and getting all the summons ready to rumble for the main event. When actually, all I really needed to do was show up. The huge damage carries even this late in Act 5 and makes this fight almost easy? Madoc and Korlik were literal jokes. I mean, they went down super quickly to the Fury attacks. I think it was helped by the fact that the rolls that I got were pretty favorable, with both of them being cold enchanted with nothing more than an aesthetic mod slapped on with it. Talik caused me some issues, more annoyance than close calls as he did keep whirlwinding all around, but in the end he had to bend the knee to the superior damage dealing character that was buffed in the D2R patches. That's Fury Druid, versus Whirlwind. That was an unnecessary explanation. Oh hey, look! Souls! Now in the throne I did have souls, but I prefer to fight them than take on waves 4 and 5. Again, maybe overreacting / over-preparing because I chose to fight these things, but really, I thought that having a clean throne would be essential to beating them, and I was kind of right. Wave 4 was much easier than expected. All I really needed were some on-point summon placements. Those would stop the pit lords in their tracks enough that I could fury away at them freely. Wave 5 on the other hand was still wave 5, and even with them being affected by my poison rabies attacks, they still proceeded to kick more ass than the poison immune wave 4 could. That's just the dragons for you. I still stuck it out and cleared all of them, but for Lister, who was physical immune and took little to no damage from rabies poison, I just decided to let him have it. Finally, it was time for Hellbale, and this was a relatively quick fight due to all my damage and stuff, so I'll keep my send-off speech short. This was a lot of fun. I really like the summon aspect that I got to play with this guy in normal with Poison Vine, which did pretty nice but did taper off as expected. Then, however, the melee aspect kicked in, and thanks to some timely lucky finds of the club and the polearm, the offense was well taken care of throughout. Defense is where this guy struggled, and I died many a times with him due to his lackluster HP and resistances. I do think that the Bear and Sage made things better in Hell, so that ended up working out okay, and thus ends this mini playthrough. Hope you like this. Yours truly, with love.